Welcome everybody. It's Thursday, the 21st of November, 2024, for a webinar with Wanda Marshall. She's going to be talking about the speaking exam for A Level. And this is the first of a series, we hope, of clinics. We decided to call it a clinic rather than surgery about A Level. We started this as an ALL branch because we realised that in our own committee meetings, we would often talk about the things we had to talk about and then talk at the end about things which were concerning us. And A Level often came up as something which we felt we don't necessarily have very much training on. So that's why we decided to do this. We've had a good number of people who've signed up, and we've got another one which is coming along soon. So on to the next slide. So these are the sorts of people who are going to be turning up, other people as well. Tonight you've got me. I'm Helen Myers. I'm chair of the London branch. You've got Wanda. Oh, sorry, I haven't added any handle there to you. This is my fault.
I don't have one.
Nick. Oh, right, okay. It's very wise. Nick will be along sometimes. Natalie will be along sometimes. And today Sharon is with us, although she's not very well, so she's a bit in the background. Okay, next slide. We always encourage people to join ALL at these. Please, could you write in the chat if you're a member and encourage people to come. We know that it's something where we could charge people if they're not ALL members, but we really hope that by making these free, people come along, like us, and feel almost, yeah, they ought to join really, because it's a charity and people are doing it for free. So please do join us. That would be good. Okay, and it's good to see Ines say it's a really good idea to have webinars about A Level. Good. We certainly had lots of people sign up for it. So I know quite a few people couldn't be with us tonight, but again, they're going to be watching the video. So to those people watching, welcome to you. Okay, the slide before, by the way, was just, if we go back, I've already set up a page for each of the webinars we have. So you'll be receiving this as a PowerPoint, and you'll be able to go to that link and see a link to the recording. You'll be able to see the chat, any pictures we take, or any resources which if Wanda wants to share, they'll be there. So don't worry about getting that detail now. That will be sent to you. And all our webinars, that's the same for all our webinars. So we've got about, I think, nearly 200 webinars or so now you could look at if you want to. Okay, next one. So coming soon, and this is hot off the press. It was only just about an hour ago that Sharon confirmed that we decided on the time and the place. So on Tuesday, the 10th of December, and it's going to be at 7 o'clock. For all webinars, I always say to people, what suits you best? So it's rather nice to have a little bit of a change. So Tuesday, the 10th of December, we're going to have another clinic, and this time it'll be the focus on Edexcel paper 1. I imagine even if you do AQA, there'll be elements of it, many elements, which are pretty much the same, but we recognise that there'll be some webinars will be focusing on a particular one, some on both. Okay, so please do, you can sign up for that now. And then the other thing which we want to really promote is our January event, which is now live. And we're delighted that that's going to be held at the Harris Academy, Bermondsey. Thanks to the Harris team, they're being very generous in letting us go there. So that's going to be a good programme. Yes, we'll be talking for the secondary. There'll obviously be things to do with the new GCSE, but we always have something for primary, and we'll have lots of exhibitors there as well, hopefully. So please, you can sign up for that. And then I don't think Judith could be with us tonight. She's on the Judith Riffizer, the president of ALL at the moment. She's part of our ALL London team. So we'd love it if as many people as possible could support her in this, her first year as president. And that's going to be 14th to 15th of March at Chesford Grange Hotel. So please do follow those links and sign up. Okay. So on to tonight, I'm about to pass over to Wanda. There's the title. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see what it is she's going to talk about, and we can introduce Wanda. So there's the overview. So an overview of the formats of AQA and Excel exams and their mark schemes and general tips. And throughout all of this, we are saying, aren't we, Wanda, that we'd like people to join in on the chat. So Wanda might say something, you think, oh yeah, I do that, or yes, and I do something else. So as she's going through, perhaps you could write down into the chat anything that you do that can help. But also, if you have questions about what she's talking about, we were thinking perhaps it's better for her to get to the end of what she's prepared, because the answer to your question might come later on. But then we'll definitely come back to questions, and really both of us have got time to stay as long as you need really to go through that. So our normal idea is that, or our normal protocol is to make it easier for us afterwards to retrieve the questions. If it's a question you're asking, put a Q and then what the question is. Is that all right? Okay, and then the next slide. You can see her anyway, but there's a lovely picture of Wanda. It really is very nice.
I was going to wear that scarf as well. I'm glad I didn't. It's like very
Good.
scarf. Yeah.
Blue background looks good as well. I realised obviously it's not a hat. It actually is, I think, someone standing behind you. But anyway,
with a little tiny Arsenal badge, you can see. You'd be very proud. Yeah.
So there we are. That's Wanda, and that's about her. So you can read that. But I'm going to now hand over to Wanda to talk herself about who she is and what she's going to do. So thank you so much, Wanda, for doing this. It's really, really generous of you to kick us off on this series.
Hi, hello everyone, good evening. So thank you, Helen. And as it says, I'm just going to pick out one thing of all the things it says on the screen at the moment, and that is that I'm an examiner for AQA. But I'm just going to say straight away that I'm not speaking officially as someone from AQA. So I'm not employed by AQA and I'm not an official representative. So anything I say today is just sort of informal, and it's not coming from the exam board at all. So I'm just going to kind of preface everything with that. And as well as being an examiner, I also teach the EdXL course. So I kind of am familiar with both, pretty familiar with both of them. So I examine AQA, but I teach EdXL, and I have taught AQA as well. So I'm kind of, yeah, it goes with both. As you can see, I'm very much a Germanist, but I have taught French in the past. My Spanish is atrocious, but I'm going to have examples from German and French. So what I was going to do, we've got about 40 minutes or so, and I was going to try and speak for about half an hour, and then we could have 10 minutes for sort of Q&A and discussion and things at the end. And the way I was going to divide it up is that I'm going to talk for the first part about preparing students for the exam. And then for the second part, I'll talk about conducting the exam as a teacher examiner. Because I've listened to lots and lots and lots of exams as an examiner, and I thought it might be quite helpful for people to hear about, you know, what's good and what isn't good. And I'll also talk in terms of preparing students. I'll be talking as well quite a bit about the IRP and preparing students for that. I'm also going to just quickly say before I start, I'm going to make perhaps a very bold assumption that most people on this call, on this webinar, are teaching either AQA or EdXL. There's a tiny, tiny little bit about EduCAS, but I'm going to say I don't know as much about it at all. However, the general kind of preparation applies to all boards and all languages. So yeah, that's what it is. So I'm also going to focus mostly, the other thing I'm going to say before I start off is that I was going to focus mostly on the how to prepare students, and in particular the AO4, which I'm assuming most of you will know is the knowledge of society. I'm not going to talk that much about things like the grammar and the language itself, because that's very language specific, and also it comes up in the other papers as well very much. I mean, obviously, how well you speak the foreign language in terms of your grammar and your vocabulary comes up in these exams, but I was going to focus more on the sort of generic things that are exclusive to paper 3 rather than the other papers. So the first part of the speaking exam in both EdXL and AQA is a stimulus card. It's a response to the stimulus card, and I've taken an example from French because that's the other language I can speak, and I thought most people speak French. On the left of your screen, you've got an example from AQA, and on the right, you've got an example from EdXL. And one of the things I thought would be quite useful to sort of start off like this is because most of you on the call either do one or the other. And it's always interesting, I think, to see what the other board is, because there's always, especially if you've been teaching a while, there's this idea that, oh, the grass might be a bit greener on the other side. And it's interesting to see how the two boards compare. So the AQA on the left, one of the things about AQA is that, and also in this case, I've taken a card from a topic which actually appears in both boards. So culture and, well, in AQA, it's a bit more une culture fière de son patrimoine. In German, it's literally exactly the same. It's Feste und Traditionen in both boards. So AQA always has a kind of title here. They always have a picture, and they always have 3 questions at the bottom. The thing that's a bit different for French is that they have a little bit of text like that. In German, the text is a bit sort of spread out, usually. In French and Spanish, they have a little chunk of text and a picture. The picture's a bit of a red herring, because the picture's not there for a kind of GCSE style, you know, tell me about what's on the picture, that you're never going to get anything. The picture is just a sort of, I don't know, make it look a bit nicer. It links to the topic, but it is, as I say, I think often a red herring, and particularly in the German one. In French and Spanish, you just get the one picture. In German, you often get quite a lot of little pictures, and so people, the temptation is your eye is always drawn to the picture, and the temptation is to try and sort of talk about what's in it, but that's not particularly relevant. So anyway, there's a title, there's a picture or pictures, there's some text, and then there are always 3 questions, and the questions are always, the first one is, tell me about what's on the card. The second question is always, what do you think about what's on the card? It's your personal reaction. And the third question is, tell me I'm paraphrasing, tell me everything you know about this topic in France, in this case, France. Yeah. But obviously you've got to then sort of link it specifically to what they're asking about. So it's got to be about in this particular context, is in what way is the patrimoine menacé, under threat. Okay, so it's not quite tell me everything you know about this topic, but it's always the 3 questions, and it always is divided in all 3 languages into what's on the card, what's your opinion of it, and the third one is always the AO4 one. So the first one, and when I say AO4, it's always about your knowledge of society. Edexcel speaking, the card, you also have a stimulus card. They call it a stimulus card, but it's a very different thing in that there are never any pictures, and you get a choice. In fact, I should have said at the very beginning, both boards give you a choice of which card you wanted, of 2 different cards. And with AQA, you get to see the 2 cards and then you choose one. With Edexcel, you get a choice of, they'll tell you, okay, so you can have a card about, and if I'm thinking of German, you can have a card about education, or you can have a card about immigration. But once but you don't get to actually see the cards. So you have to just say, okay, well, I'm going to go with education, but you don't know what's going to be on the card. Whereas with AQA, you can see both cards. So with Edexcel, you choose your card, you choose the topic, but you don't know what's on the card. And once you've chosen, you get to see it. And then you get another choice of whether you want to talk about A or B on the card. So it's different. It's interesting because they're really, really quite different. The beginnings of the paper like this are really different. So then you have to answer 2 questions, either A or B. The examiner will have 2 questions related. So here it says, if you look at A, vous devez considérer le rôle des festivals dans la société francophone. So the question would be something like, quel est le rôle des festivals dans la société francophone que vous avez étudié? Sorry, my French is a bit dodgy, but yeah, that's what it is. So you can see they have 2 completely different beginnings of the card. They both last around the same sort of time, 6 to 7 minutes or so, but that's what you're dealing with the first part of the exam. This is just an example for a German one, just to show you that in the German it's always divided into little pictures and little bits of text instead of the big chunk, which is weird. I never knew that. I thought that they were all the same, but yeah, French and Spanish are the same and German is different. Anyway, so these are slides that I've used before in kind of training sessions. There's quite a lot of text. It's not ideal, but I'm not going to read everything out or anything like that. But one of the things that if you're teaching Edexcel in terms of preparing your students is that you will know that the topics are kind of grouped together. So if, for example, and this is a German example, the first 3 topics are environment, education, and work. If you choose a card about environment, you have to also be prepared to talk about work and education. So you need to know with Edexcel which 3 topics are always grouped together. So that's one of the one of the kind of really important ways you need to prepare your students for the exam. In terms of analysis, you need to remember that it's just not like describing everything that's happened in that country recently, but you've got to sort of say things like, well, in exactly the same way as for paper 2, you would never just tell the story of the book or the film. You're not going to tell the story of why, you know, you could sort of you have to give specific examples as well. So if you were to say, for example, that in Germany, people are often very anti-technology, that's kind of a sweeping statement. And then you could say, for example, that's still very old-fashioned, that many local authorities still use fax machines or something like that. You know, you're backing it up. I'm going to talk in a minute on the next slide a bit about the next couple of slides about how you prepare your students well for the AO4 part, and how you can kind of work together with your class to sort of keep a bank of knowledge, because there's so much. It's very difficult to know everything about the whole of the country that you're talking about, but there are ways of sort of streamlining it and ways of encouraging your students to kind of keep abreast of what's going on. But I'll move on and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So one of the things that the students have to do as part of this, the first part of the exam, is to ask questions. And again, this is something you can train your students to do, and you can really kind of, you can train them up to practice this. You can practice in pairs, you can practice and practice and practice. With AQA, you as the teacher examiner can say, if they've got to the end of their time and they haven't asked you any questions, you as a teacher examiner can just say to them, oh, have you got a question for me? And that's fine. It's this kind of tick box exercise. I mean, the students often find it really frustrating, but you have to remind them that when the exams were designed, which by the way, had nothing to do with it. So, you know, there was this idea that there was meant to be a natural conversation, and as part of a conversation, you have to ask questions, because that's what happens, and you have to initiate communication. But it has meant over the years that it's just become one of these things like, oh my gosh, I have to ask a question. It is meant to be with EdXL. It's kind of, it's also to do with, like, it's not just in AQA, it's literally just a tick box asking a question, which is ridiculous. In EdXL, you're not allowed to prompt the student to ask a question. And the whole idea is that the student is meant to, it's there checking for understanding. So it's one of these things you can really, really practice with your students with EdXL, that when you're having a conversation, the student gets used to sort of saying in whatever language you're teaching, oh, do you agree? Or I think this and that. What do you think? And again, it's sort of quite artificial, but it's this checking for understanding. With AQA, it's literally they have to ask 2 questions. Tick, tick, job done. With EdXL, there's no, well, I don't think there is. Maybe there is meant to be 2 as well, but it is meant to be this checking for understanding. It's meant to be this much more kind of organic thing. I definitely always practice with the mark scheme. I've got mini versions of the mark scheme. You can kind of photocopy it down and down. I've seen in loads of class, one thing that's really good that I've seen in lots of classes is where they have the mark scheme laminated. So you can just use it over and over again, and you have that in the classroom, or the students have it in their folder that they carry around with them, and that they can test each other and they can do little mini part 1s all the time. If you're lucky enough to have a language assistant, obviously it's a no-brainer to train them up to do mini part 1s, and the way that the questions work, and the follow-up questions. And I'll talk about the examining itself in a minute. It seems to be it is something definitely that you can practice. So part 1 you can practice over and over, and it's really something really quite straightforward. So AO4, in case anyone doesn't know, AO4 is the bit of marking. I'm going to show you a mark scheme in a minute, which is the knowledge and analysis of what's happening in the society of the target language country or countries. And it's weird because for this part of the exam, this first part, it's really, really variable. That for AQA, it's only worth 20%. For EdXL, it's 40, and for EduCAS, it's 25. And I know a lot of teachers, for example, that teach AQA and that get really, really hung up on this AO4 and sort of feel like, oh, well, they really need to know so much, and they need to know this and they need to know that. But the thing is that it's actually quite an easy way of getting marks. As soon as, because of one of the things I've heard many, many times is semi-native or native speakers, because unfortunately for German, it might well be the same for the other subjects. You have quite a lot of entries from native speakers who I don't know, have come to boarding school here and are doing their A levels here. And then you have kind of, I sometimes, my heart often sinks when I see a centre of like 15 students, because you know they're going to be nearly all native speakers. And often, and this is a generalization, they're often not that well prepared because they just think, well, I can just rock up and do this exam, and I don't. And then the teacher will say, so what do you think about integration in German society, integration of immigrants in German society? And you'll literally hear them kind of sigh and lean back and kind of go, oh, I don't really know so much about that. And you're just like, why are you doing this exam then? But so they then lose. You can have someone whose German is absolutely amazing, and then boom, they've lost their 5 marks that they could have had for that. And that's, you know, that makes, as we all know, the grade boundaries are ridiculously high. That's for a different webinar another time. So it's really important to try and get every single mark that you could when you're preparing students for this. So this is something that would be nice that we can maybe discuss a bit more at the end in terms of if anyone's got any better idea. There are commercial sheets. There are sheets produced by the exam, not the exam boards, but by the Hodder and Oxford and the people that make the textbooks. And so for example, I know the Hodder ones are being updated at the moment. There are sheets that give facts and figures about the 12 topics that we all study. There are other ways of doing it. You know, you could get students to keep a news diary. You can have, obviously, doing things like mind maps for every topic is really important. You can kind of divvy it up and say, if you're lucky enough to have a decent sized class, you could say, you know, I know that especially for French and Spanish, you often have quite large classes for A level. You could say, okay, well, you two, I'm going to put you in charge of the topic of family. And that is your, you know, you two need to kind of keep an eye. Every now and again, you can divide it between the two of you, but you need to keep an eye. And if there's something that changes in the law, or there's something that's happened in Spain or Spanish-speaking countries, you need to tell, you're the ones that need to be responsible that tell us about it. Obviously, you need to keep an eye, because you know your students. If you think they can't be trusted, and you end up with a whole class that doesn't know anything about the family life because they were the ones responsible for it, you know, you might want to reassess that. There's lots of kind of games you can play in terms of getting students to speak, pass the bomb or just a minute or Pictionary. You can start lessons with little stimulus cards. You can end lessons with little stimulus cards. There's lots and lots of things that different teachers have got and different ideas, but it is quite important to be relatively up to date with this AO4, because not in terms of like you need to know the absolute latest opinion poll or something like that, but if something dramatic has changed, like they've changed the age of marriage, or Germany has the AfD have won a huge amount of votes and that has changed the kind of political landscape, or you know, Brexit obviously has made a massive difference to the cards about the European Union. You know, things like that, you do need to be a bit up to date. So that is really important. I was going to just quickly show you as well before we move on to the next bit, so this is the Edexcel mark scheme for the first part of the exam. It's out of 30. You get a whopping 12 marks for your AO3, which is your language, another 12 marks for your knowledge of society, which is your AO4, and then you get these 6 marks for interaction. And if you don't ask the questions that you need to ask, you can drop, this is where you can drop marks so that you can automatically, if you haven't asked any questions, the highest you can get for interaction is a 4. And so, you know, there's a sort of sliding scale. This is the AQA one. AQA have it on a beautiful, so the previous one, the Edexcel, I just made that myself because I couldn't find anywhere, I guess maybe because I'm not an Edexcel examiner, I couldn't find anywhere a nice sheet that had it all on one page. So I just did a copy and paste for myself. This is the official AQA one that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, and it's what we examiners use as well. When we listen to the exams, we use that to mark from. It's kind of divided up a bit more. And the thing that's interesting with AQA is you get your mark for AO2 which is your response to written language, because there is written language on the card. For French and Spanish, there's that little kind of chunk of text. In German, there's those little bits of text all around. And so this is where I think I said at the very beginning with AQA, there were the 3 questions. The first question is, tell me about what's on the card. And that's where you get your AO2 marks. And the second question is, give me your opinion. And there you just can get some marks for AO3. It's not, it's your opinion. Always tell them not to spend too long on that one, because it's not actually worth that many, in a way, as a sort of standalone question. Yes, you can demonstrate some nice range of vocabulary, but it doesn't kind of, it doesn't either respond to the written language or necessarily give you the marks for showing what's happening in that country. And then the third question on the on the AQA exam is then this where you pick up your big chunk of your knowledge and understanding of what's happening in that society. So I was this is just a very quick bit, because obviously that we've got different boards and different languages. This is some extracts from some German examiners' reports from over the last few years. And one of the things that the different boards are looking for. So, for example, if we look at that middle one, Edexcel are looking for, they want specific examples from the targets from the in this case, it did say German-speaking world that can be used to substantiate viewpoints. And what I said also at the very beginning, that with the AQA card, there's always a title, and AQA examiners are always, in the exam report, they want people to look at the title, because a title is part of the card. That's the thing I think I said at the beginning about having the focus on the photo. And in German, there's often stats and things as well. So your eyes are drawn to the photo, but you can train your students to look at the title, because the title it tells you what the card's about, and it also gives a starting point to discussion about to the question, tell me about what's on the card. You can train them to say, well, the title's about that, and that means that this, or this leads to that, or, it's definitely something that you can hook onto. This is the second part of the in terms of kind of preparing for part one of the exam. The AQA examiner's report also mentions that in that third question, although I was being a bit glib and saying that the third question is tell me everything you know about blah, 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 it often doesn't quite say that. And it often looks really, the third question is often a little bit more specific than that. So when students are making their choice of which of the two cards they're going to do, and as I said, you get to see both cards, you can train them to look at that bottom question and sort of say, okay, well, actually, this bottom question is all about the classical music scene in Berlin, and I really don't know anything about classical music, so I think I'm going to leave the Berlin card, and in fact, I'm going to do the unification card instead, because that's a bit more straightforward. And with Edexcel, contrarily, if you had a choice of the two questions, and there's only two kind of boxes on the Edexcel card, and then within that there are two questions. Even if once you've got the card and you look at your choices and your heart sinks and you think, actually, this is absolutely hopeless, all is not lost, because in fact, those two the first two questions that you get asked are only a tiny part of the exam, that then your examiner, you, the teacher, or the external examiner will go on and ask lots of other questions. So they don't need to kind of worry too much if they don't really understand what's on the card or anything like that. And then this is the final, and we mentioned this already, but this is what the examiners said, that that with Edexcel, they really want you to ask a question at a natural time, and it should be more part of the spontaneity. It always makes me laugh, the idea of it being in this highly, highly stressful exam conditions, this idea that you should then be spontaneous and lively and, don't you think? And to talk to your teacher like that is just absurd. But anyway, you can be trained to do it, and you can even have quite a lot of fun with it. You could kind of do exercises in class where it then does become spontaneous, this sort of, don't you think? What do you think? Isn't it? Or in it, as some of they all say, but obviously in the right language. Anyway, okay, so that was the end. So that was part one. So that's sort of 6 to 7 minutes. That's your stimulus card and the conversation that follows a stimulus card. And then in all boards, the next part of it is the IRP. Although having said that, I have a feeling that in Yeah, I think it's also the same in Educas. So the IIP, the first time, in terms of preparing your students, obviously, the very first thing you're going to do is choose a title. So the three good things are having it rooted in the country. So no comparisons, for example, between Lidl in Germany and Lidl in Britain. Questions are really good. Questions are brilliant. And it should be of interest to the student and within his or her linguistic capabilities, because I've had lots and lots of IRPs over the years. I've been doing it now since 2018 or something like that. I don't know. Obviously, we had the break with COVID, but sometimes you get students that clearly are not particularly interested in their topic. And then also you sometimes get students and you just think, oh, why have you done this? Because it's just too hard. So it's tricky for you as the teachers as well to sort of, you've got someone that comes, oh, you go, and they bound in and say, I'm obsessed with this particular aspect of German military history, and and I do history and I just love history, and I want it to be all about this, and I want it to be all about Bismarck and blah blah blah, and you've got to then kind of say, okay, well, you're going to have to use some really complicated language, and it's going to be really tricky to talk about this. And I mean, yeah, it is hard to try and guide the students towards something where it works for them linguistically, but also in terms of their interests. One-word titles are terrible because you end up just doing description, like, the title of Vienna. It's in Life and Times or something. It's just, they're not good. Sometimes they're too broad. I'm going to show you some examples of some titles in a second. And occasionally you get some that are like factually incorrect and out of date, which the only reason I had that in was because sometimes you get, particularly nowadays, obviously, students that just find a ready-made one on the internet somewhere. And one in particular that I heard a few years ago was a thing all about the German football team and how they'd done so well and how marvelous they were or something. And as if it was, so they'd obviously borrowed one off someone after the 2014 World Cup where Germany did win. And they hadn't acknowledged the fact that actually the German national team had gone completely downhill since then. And it had been a catastrophe and source of national shame, etc., etc. And the person just obviously had no clue because they just borrowed this one IRP from years ago. And it's tricky because obviously you as a teacher, you're not really meant to get involved because it is the independent research project. But you are allowed to know their title, obviously, and you are allowed to kind of say yes or no, that's a good title or a bad title, or I think this is a good idea or a bad idea, and you can kind of monitor what they're doing, but you certainly can't practice it with them. And so you do have to hope that they're a little bit sensible. I'm not sure about, I think actually, no, I know both boards have got IRP advisors. And I know with AQA that they make a kind of database of people that have asked for their advice. And so that when we mark them, we then can say, we can kind of think, oh, I don't know, this is a bit of a strange title. And then we can look at the database as examiners and see whether whether that title's been approved or not. And that's really good because then it means that, and then we can kind of relax a bit and say, oh, well, this is a strange title, but it's great because it's been approved and I can just carry on and I can mark it and I don't have to worry. So these are just some examples that obviously they're from German, but I'll just give you a second to have a quick look. So if I just look at that third one down, the theme of guilt in Der Vorleser. Now, Der Vorleser is the reader by Bernhard Schlink, and that is one of the set texts, that's on both lists of AQA and EdXL. And that's quite a good idea for students that are a bit weaker and that might struggle to do a lot of independent research and certainly kind of structure their work and yeah, that are just perhaps maybe need a little bit more support. One good thing you could do is you can take a book or a film that you are not studying for your paper 2, but one that is on on the set text, which is a very, very common book or film, and then there is masses and masses of material and literature excuse me, and study guides and examples and things on the internet. And that really is that can then help a student that is struggling to do a really quite decent IRP, uh, as long as you are not studying that book in paper two, for paper two. But that is a completely legitimate thing to do. The second bad one, they ended up not being able to get any marks for AO4 for their knowledge of society at all. They literally got 0 because they didn't mention Germany once. And just because it's a German company doesn't mean that it's no good. The IRP from all the boards, both boards, must be rooted in the Germans in the country of the target language. And we've had problems again, obviously, sorry, it's a German example, but someone like Karl Lagerfeld or Einstein. Karl Lagerfeld was born in Germany, but he did all his work in France. And so it's always it's a really tricky one. Basically, if you do that, it's very difficult to get good marks because the vast majority of what you're going to talk about is about things that happened in another country. And so you won't get your knowledge of society, you won't get the AO4 marks. They're really kind of pernickety about it. And the same about Einstein. If you're going to talk about his whole life, he left Germany at a certain stage in his life, obviously. And so you'd have to reduce it to only talking about his life in Germany. So it seems really pernickety and really sort of fiddly and stupid and annoying, but I guess, you have to draw a line somewhere. So yeah, that's the way it is. So in terms of the this is the last bit, the last few bits about kind of preparing students for it. For the first part of the IRP, the students talk for 2 minutes. And in those first 2 minutes, and that's the bit that the students can learn off by heart, or tend to learn off by heart, because that gives them a bit of a sort of element of control and they can kind of really hang on to it. And in those first few minutes, in no board should it be why they chose a topic or kind of a background information. I mean, sometimes as an examiner, you're sat at home thinking, well, I wonder why they chose that. But that's not, if you look at the mark scheme, the explaining why you chose a topic doesn't come into any of it. So that is not one of the things that is we're meant to talk about in those first 2 minutes. In fact, it's very, very clear. So the first 2 minutes are completely different for both the boards. For Edexcel, it's an appraisal of the first of the 2 sources, because as you saw on the mark sheet, you don't get any AO2. AO2 is response to written language. You don't get any marks for part 1 of the exam with Edexcel for that, because all your AO2 marks come in the beginning of the IRP. And for Edexcel, I quite like teaching Edexcel because it's much clearer about what goes into those first 2 minutes, because it's literally, well, your students probably used lots and lots of sources, but you can choose to say, okay, well, one was a website and one was a book. And I used this website and it was really useful because it was much more up to date and it gave me links to other information. And I liked the way it was presented and I found it very easy to read. However, with a website, you never really know, you can't kind of trust it so much. It could be, the sources might not be so reliable. So I also read this book, and the book I felt was more reliable because it is been fact checked and published by a publishing company, etc., etc. But it was quite old fashioned or something like that. That's just a very slim version of what you can do for the Edexcel one. Whereas the AQA, it's always a little bit more ambiguous. And I mean, it's only worth 5. It's only worth 5 marks. The first 2 minutes is worth a big chunk. Wait, for Edexcel, it's worth 12 marks, and the AQA is only worth 5 marks. And so the AQA, you're just kind of setting out what it's about, what it is that you're going to, not saying I am going to talk about this, but you do a sort of mini version of what you are going to talk about in the 2 minutes. There's now, again, this is also from German, but I think it's useful, this sort of general feedback, which is super useful, that don't speak too fast, which is what the first bullet point says, which I'm also guilty of often. Because also, the poor students, they're so nervous and they're so sort of sweaty palmed and they kind of gabble of, okay, and the examiner, the teacher says, okay, well, you know, your 2 minutes starts now. And then it just, this waterfall comes out, and it's just, or that they're so slow and so hesitant that the 2 minutes have gone past and they've hardly said anything. And that then leads us on to the second point. So if you're so slow that you only get to talk about one source in your 2 minutes, you can't get higher than 6 out of 12, which is also sad because you could, you know, anyway, you need to have a balance of the two sources to get to a higher mark, which is, yeah. And the other thing about the first 2 minutes is that, yeah, just kind of giving them a biography and you know, you don't need all that sort of thing, and relevance to the title, and talking about why you chose it and all that sort of thing. So I'm just realizing the time. We're going to push on. I'm going to get a bit faster now. So this discussion of the IRP, this is this is like the longest bit of the whole speaking exam. So you've had your 6 to 7, 5 to 6, depending on the board, on the card. You've had your 2-minute presentation, and now you've got your discussion, which is around about 9 minutes or so. And this is where, and in a second, I'm going to move on to actually conducting the exams, where you as a teacher examiner can have a massive impact on the marks that your students get. So in terms of the type of questions you ask, and we're going to talk about questioning in a minute, you can't practice this with your students. I know obviously there's always going to be rogue people around that do practice, but you can tell, you know, when you listen to lots of them, you can completely tell when the student and the teacher have practiced it, and you have to fill in a form and report it and blah, 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 and it's really not, it's not worth it. And also it's, you know, it's not right. So it has to be an analysis, and and you need to ask questions that encourage analysis rather than just like, tell me about this. But one of the things you can do is one thing you could practice is you can take paper 2 essay questions about the books and the films and get them to talk it. Instead of writing it, get them to talk it. And so that's a really good kind of practice for extended talking or extended writing. You can discuss things from paper 2 and pretend they're IRPs. You can cross over and do it that way. So you're not talking about their actual IRP, but you can practice the talking about an IRP type thing. So yeah, you can, and this whole, you know, the whole point evidence evaluation or point evidence analysis or point evidence blah, 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 whichever your school, every schools do it differently, but we all do the same thing to get this balance between the factual and the analytical. So you can practice that definitely. This is the mark scheme, just to quickly show you. As you can see, this is the EdXL one. So the first 2 minutes get a whopping 12 marks. But as I said, in a way, this is an aspect of the EdXL exam that I find a little bit easier, and it's a bit more straightforward because this source thing is, yeah, it is quite clear. And then, as with other, you know, you've got AO3, AO4, and interaction. And then with AQA, the first 2 minutes are only worth 5 marks, and you're marked on your knowledge and understanding of the area of study. So your presentation. And then again, it's AO1, AO3, AO4. It's not very different. I mean, the weighting is slightly different, whatever. So, okay. So the last thing that I'm going to say before we kind of open it up to questions and things and discussion is that these are just sort of observations from having marked quite a lot of exams. The first one actually is not so, in fact, I can take the first one out because nobody sends anything anymore. It's all just done online. So ignore that first thing. The thing about the choose a form of address is that because the cards are written in the vous, sie, maybe Spanish usted, yeah, maybe, form. And then, but you know your students. This is all on the assumption that you're doing the exam with your students, but you know your students and you're used to saying to or do to them. You don't get marked down or anything like that between if you start with one and you go to the other, but it's just a little bit odd. And so it is completely acceptable. And it does, if you wade through those sort of books, the information for the conduct of exams, if you wade through, it does say it's completely fine to change the cards to or do or whatever it is in Spanish. And because that's the way you normally speak to your students, and it's kind of weird to change it. And it's also completely fine if they say do to you, even though really technically they shouldn't, because you're the teacher and they're the student. And but you don't get marked down or anything like that. One of the things when you do the exams, please put the microphone near the student, not near you, because I know we all think as teachers that we're the centre of the world, but we're not in these exams. It needs to be near the student. And also you can practice, because doing the speaking exams is super stressful and scary, because we've been building up to this for 2 years, and it's our students' marks on the line, and it's sort of, yeah, it's super stressful, but it is really, you can practice. It's, you can just do it at home with a stopwatch and that sort of thing. The last point is quite interesting, and that is that traditionally, statistically, students have done better with an external examiner. It just because you know your students really well, and so you know little Johnny can't do the conditional. Well, you think little Johnny can't do the conditional, so you think, well, I'm not going to upset him, and I'm not going to kind of upend him and make him all stressed by asking him anything that involves a conditional, and therefore we just won't go there. And so, but in fact, it turns out that little Johnny has actually done some work for the first time in 2 years and has now nailed conditional and could do it, but we'll never know because he's never asked anything that might require it. I mean, this is a very simplistic analogy, but but that is one of the reasons that sometimes candidates don't do as well with their teachers, because their teachers are trying to have these, not prejudices, but you know your students so well and you don't want to upset them, and you kind of wrap them a bit in cotton wool. Whereas an external examiner will come in and doesn't know anything, doesn't know them at all, and they push and they push and they push to try and find their linguistic ceiling. And they're kind of, yeah, so it would never occur to them not to ask a question that involves a conditional, for example. So having said that, it's obviously difficult to get external examiners because you need a minimum of 10 candidates. Schools often try and club together, which is great, although if you're from one of the sets of students is always going to have to come from another one, and then they'll be in a different place. Obviously, it's stressful. Some students are exceptionally anxious and would do very badly with an external examiner because they don't know them, and it's entirely up to you. But but all I'm saying is that if you do conduct your own exams, try and kind of have this idea of the linguistic ceiling, and try and cast aside everything you know about them and the fact that you know that their dog died last week and that it's all awful, and just, yeah, try to push to aim for the top, I think is what I'm trying to say. So this is just, it's a lot of text. Where are we? It is, yeah, these are the last 2 slides. So, no, it's not. This is what the exam boards have said. So, as it says, there are a number of shortcomings in teacher conduct which have a detrimental effect on the marks. And the teachers that have been teaching a long time might remember that before the current A Level, there was an A Level where the students had to be quite combative, and they actually got marks for being combative, and you had to kind of argue and debate with your teacher. And there are definitely some teacher examiners that I've heard over the years that are still in that mindset, which this idea that you have to somehow debate with your students, and it's not like that at all. One of the things that's really important is to do follow-up questions. So if you're looking, if you think back to the section 1 questions, in fact, I'm just going to go all the way back. Those, particularly with AQA, that you need to ask supplementary questions between the questions, because if the first question is tell me about what's on the card, they need to then also have other supplementary questions to demonstrate the fact that they can do more than just read out what they wrote in their 5 minutes preparation time, that they can respond to language, that they can interact with you, etc., etc. I wouldn't necessarily ask a supplementary question to your opinion, because your opinion's your opinion, so the second question. But for the third question as well, you need to ask as many questions as possible to demonstrate that they can that there's good knowledge of understanding, that they can support their arguments, that they can, I know what I'm trying to come to, is this idea that they can respond to unpredictable elements. So in both, where is it? Maybe it's more of an AQA than an Excel thing, but that this idea that they need to respond to unpredictable elements, that they need to kind of be able to, yeah, to not just read out what they prepared and not just come out with what they've obviously memorized about their IRP. You need to show that they can talk about it, that they can interact spontaneously, that they can respond with assurance, and that they can actually have a conversation about it. And that's where this questioning comes in, that pick up on the points made by students and ask follow-up questions, and try not to allow them to deliver long monologues. I mean, obviously you can't practice the IRP discussion with them, but you can say to them, look, just so you know, I'm going to interrupt you because I can't let you talk for ages and ages and ages. If you talk for ages and ages, that you're not demonstrating that you can actually that you can talk spontaneously. Okay. With the IRP, the students will give you their bullet points or questions. What's very misleading with AQA is that they say list 2 sources that you've used, and then the form comes on to say list further sources or points for discussion or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording. And really, you just want to tell your students, ignore the further sources bit, because that's complete. Nobody ever looks at the source. It's not important at all. Just list the 2. And then what the rest of the form should be used for is the areas that you want to talk about. So, for example, if your IRP is about Bauhaus, which is an architectural school in Germany from the 20s, and the student has done about the role of women in Bauhaus, why was it innovative? And they list that as their bullet points in English, by the way. The form should always be in English, not in the target language. And then you, as the examiner, you go away and you have their bullet points, and you do maybe, I don't know, a kind of 2-minute Wikipedia search, so a tiny, tiny bit about what they're doing it about, maybe. This is when you're just about to do the exam, when, a week before the exam or something, when you're kind of preparing it. And then you write questions that could come from those bullet points. So you're helping your students. The whole point is that your students have gone away and done all this huge amount of research. They've told you what you've researched, and then you write the questions that link to their research. You're not trying to catch them out or anything like that. But on the other hand, you're also writing questions that will then allow them to demonstrate their analysis. You're not writing questions like, tell me about Bauhaus, tell me about women in Bauhaus. So the target language equivalent of to what extent is your friend. I mean, in German, it's a lovely, just one little word, inwiefern. So as soon as you're putting to what extent on the beginning of a question, you're instantly having to make them analyze, because it's not just saying, do you think this was good? Yes or no, or that kind of thing. And in a way, their own opinion isn't really that important. It's just the analysis and the analysis. And that's what one of this bottom thing, this feedback from examiners, that says that it was clear that sometimes examiners have followed their own agenda. And the best types of exam is what I've just discussed, where the examiners have the students' bullet points or key findings, whatever you call them. They've gone away and actually prepared questions. The worst thing is often that you get the feeling that the teacher's just rocked up and hasn't prepared anything, which is also really sad for the student, because the teacher just doesn't have enough questions prepared. Where the teacher's kind of prepared questions, and that the questions are really good, and that the teacher's actually listening to what the students are saying, instead of just kind of going, oh, well, they've got 8 bullet points, so I have to ask them about all 8. You definitely don't. The examiner sees the bullet points, but you're not marked down if you haven't covered all the bullet points or all the key findings. It's much better to have a kind of in-depth discussion of 5 of them than to have covered all 8. I'm really aware of the time, and we said we wanted to have some questions. So is there anything that anyone is desperate? Helen, are you going to?
Well, firstly, thank you ever so much. And I know that some people will have to leave now, but we are having other webinars, and our idea is that we really do want to make it that people can discuss. But for this starting one, we said, no, we'd really like to do a presentation. So, but there are some questions. So shall I just go through?
Yeah.
By the way, can I just say, so I don't forget this, remember that we've got the curriculum and assessment review. You must fill that in by midnight or 1 minute to midnight on Friday. As you were going through here, Wanda, talking about certain things where you've obviously found your way around things, but there are some things which perhaps are not ideal, which perhaps are too demanding, you might feel. So I think that's the sort of thing, definitely use this as an occasion to write that, because although the new GCSE has been changed recently, and perhaps there might not be much appetite to change that, the A level perhaps could be in line for looking at it again and seeing if there...
with the new GCSE, because the back gap is not going to be massive. It's
I mean, honestly, as you're going through that, Vanda, I'll ask other people's questions, but my own feeling is, again, wow, this is demanding, isn't it? What we ask people to do and what we ask teachers to go through as well. It's so dependent. And I know that I expect it happens for AQA as well as an EdXL exam, and you get a little report on you as the examiner, don't you, as to how well you've done. So
well, you don't anymore.
don't you?
No, we used to get paid to do them. We don't know. It's only if it's gone really, really badly. If you get one, then you know that things haven't gone well, I'm afraid. So yeah, not for AQA anyway. Yeah.
But thank you ever so much on behalf of everybody, Vanda, for that. It's really helpful. And the fact that we've got that recorded so we
Yeah.
can go through it again is really helpful. So there were a couple of questions, and if people want to ask them themselves, they can. Otherwise, I'll do it on your behalf. And I'm just looking back there. Let me just make it so that if people do want to unmute or start video, you can, because it's quite nice for us to see people. And perhaps we don't need to share this. Well, actually keep the screen in case you want to show people, I suppose. So we had one of the first questions there was, and I wrote it up there. Oh yes, Connie Constantine. I don't know if you're still with us, Connie, are you? If you want to, you might want to open up your video and ask it. She says, you said that Hodder's updating resources. Do you know whether new textbooks are coming out soon?
I don't know. And I think probably they need to be, because they're really diabolical. Because they were written for 2000 and, they were written in 2015, really, weren't they? In 14, 15 for first teaching and 16. Possibly for French and Spanish. I think for German.
Connie, by the way, she's joined us.
Oh, hello. Hi. I think it's highly unlikely for German, but possibly for French and Spanish. And I don't know is the answer. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then Ines had to go, but I said that I'll ask her a question, and obviously this will be recorded. She says, for on AO2, do they have to include everything in the card? That was when you were going with
well, in a way, no. For AQA, this is for AQA. No, but in a way, it's good if they don't, because then that gives you, as the teacher, examiner, a chance to then kind of hone in on. And in terms of preparing for the exam, you get the cards in advance, so you can actually write. I kind of tend to scribble all over them and write loads and loads of questions. This is when I'm teaching, not when I'm examining. Write loads of questions that could possibly come from all the little bits of text on the card. So in a way, it's better if they don't do that, because then you can ask further questions about it, and then they get to show that they're answering spontaneous, unexpected questions. So yeah, they don't have to cover everything.
And I do love the way that you're saying that, because we all know this. It is impossible, really. It's very difficult to fairly judge spontaneity.
It's just.
And what do? Of course, we train people to sound surprised. Oh, that's a good question.
Isn't it?
Yes, just one moment, I have to reflect. Even if you know what the answer is, you give them all of these phrases, because it's, as you say, it's high stakes, very stressful, and you've got to make them feel comfortable about it, haven't you? So, right, and we've got another question there, and I don't know if you wanted to, if you're there. Oh, Marika was asking the same question then about the AO2. And really, Anne Snell, are you there, Anne? You asked a question. You just said, does the whole stimulus card task really feel too rushed in the time? How do you feel?
No, not particularly, but it depends on the student. Sometimes it feels like it's the longest 6 minutes in the world if the student's not got anything to say. If they've got loads to say, then sometimes it does. But no, I don't think it does. No. I think it just depends on the student, to be honest. It doesn't feel like there's enough time to ask enough questions, definitely, I would say. But yeah.
And Aoife is here. Aoife, come on, you're not shy. Would you like to show yourself and ask your question? Otherwise, I will ask on your behalf. It's odd, I can't see all of the way I've got. Right. Well, I will ask her question. This is
Oh,
A.
she says her camera's not working. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Is your So she asks, how should we approach the IRP in the trial exams? It's a really good question.
Yeah, I know it's really good because sometimes I hear that they basically they do the whole IRP in their mocks, and I sort of sit there and think, oh no, you shouldn't do that. I mean, it's as I said, you can. I've heard schools where they do make the students do a completely different IRP or kind of link it to one of the topics they're doing. So, for example, if you're doing the topic of, if by the end of the mocks, by the end of year 12, I don't know, if we take the example of festivals and traditions or something, which I think is in every board,
Mm.
you say to the students, okay, well, you're going to do an IRP on a question relating to festivals and traditions, and so you get the practice of doing the exam and the extended conversation without the actual topic you're going to do in the real thing.
Mm.
So
I mean, perhaps that's something as well. Let's ask people. We've got
Mm.
some participants here. How do you manage that then? Because
yeah.
in these sessions, we're not saying that we're the experts on these.
No, not at all. No, 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 no.
Actually, perhaps we might stop sharing the screen because then we can see people. Because at the moment, I can only just see
Oh,
people.
there's someone's
Yeah,
sharing.
so we've got Elizina there.
Yes,
So
I've been teaching A level for about 10 years now,
Yeah.
and we do fake IRPs and also mini IRPs in year 12. So,
Okay.
not the length of the whole of the exam, but, it's very useful. In the mocks, it's always because, we don't want them to have exactly the same thing. So you do mini IRPs in AS and year 12, and then in year 13, we do 3 mocks. 2 are different topics, and then the real one they have to prepare is completely different from the previous mocks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a bit like you were saying, Wanda, that idea of did you say about doing the question twos and treating them as
Yeah, the paper two questions, because there's there's so huge banks of questions now, because the exam's been going since 2018. So
Mm.
if you can take
Share the link. I hope
as
someone
well,
can
and
help
list
to
everything.
help. Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
shared the idea on the IRP, all I've done. There's loads of ideas for mocks and real things, but I mean, there's plenty of things online anyway, but those are the ones I did with my students. So, in Spanish.
Thank you very much. I opened that straight away. It all worked. So we'll put all of these things together. But I can see there are 2 more questions that are in the chat I will ask. But one thing, and I don't want to influence people too much on what they say in their curriculum and assessment review answers. But something I would say is a real problem is that when ALCAB put together what the subject content was for the A level, I think their idea was that these should just be called individual research project. It wasn't meant to be independent. And there's
Yeah.
such a difference between individual and independent. For
Yeah.
me, it is ridiculous. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous that such a chunk goes to something where they're meant to not have any teaching at all. We have little enough time with them to say, well, with that section, no, I'm not allowed to help you, I'm not allowed to guide you. So whether or not that might be a point that I'm certainly going to be making it in my response is to say, even if they may not want revolution, but evolution would be perhaps even
Yeah.
changing that particular definition where it was misunderstood. I've asked the people on the LCAB and they said, no, we didn't mean that. We meant it just to be individual, doing something that they want to do, not this idea of just doing it without any help, because it so obviously gives some people an advantage. And perhaps that might come on to the question that we've got here from where are you? Somebody was asking about the AI, the use of AI. Oh yes, Anne Snell, are you there? Want to ask your question, Anne?
Hi. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yes. Well, because students can get their introductions really done for them at the flick of a button, I wonder how we can encourage students to think a bit more for themselves. I wonder if people have come across this where students think, oh, I've got my introduction done because I've looked it up, because I've used ChatGPT and there it is, perfect French and German. Why do I have to do it myself?
Well, I think the language could be perfect that way, but that doesn't mean that the content is going to be perfect. And I mean, I think I think it's harder for AQA because it's a little bit vague about what has to be in those first 2 minutes. Whereas with Edexcel, this idea of the kind of comparing the sources does lend itself to actually having to give your own opinions and sort of say, well, I like this better than that, and that worked for me better than this. I don't know. That's a short answer. I don't know if anyone else has got an answer.
What do other people think? Because I mean, I have to say, I think ChatGPT is absolutely fantastic. You know, I know that when these things first come out, people can say, well, no, it'll never replace it. It's not as good. I mean, I put things in and I get perfect answers back that I think, oh yeah, that is really good. So I think it is a difficult thing. By the way, is it possible to stop sharing the screen?
Oh yes, should I stop sharing mine? Yeah.
That's great. Just in case anybody else wanted to show their video.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anybody else, before we go on to, there's another question. Anybody else got ideas about how to cope with AI? I mean, it's not just our subject, is it, which is faced with that. And certainly in the university sector, I've followed some discussions where they've really been saying they've just got to change the nature of testing now, because they know that that's something which can happen. And I say that, and there's Antonio da Silva. Do you have any advice on that from your point of view?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. One thing I think well, at least with me, I do ask the students to use it to practice speaking. Because not everyone, I think, is a matter of equity as well, because the students who have access to it now, they may not have contact with speakers of the language. Also, students with some kinds of needs that they really struggle to communicate with people. So I have been using it quite a lot because we have quite a few students. After COVID, it seems the number of students coming to the language really struggling to communicate is really massive. With speaking anxiety, so trying to find ways to get them to speak. So I think with AI now is really been really useful, because before I was only using some kind of recording devices they could use and email me the recording, so I could make sure that they were using, still developing the speaking. So in terms of universities, or like you say, in terms of the exams, I think, unfortunately, my feeling is always that education is behind the development in technology.
Yeah.
And we still have, people insisting on essays, etc. But I can't blame students using it, because why they was spending hours doing something boring that they could have AI to do for them. Whereas if you develop some interesting projects, they are really interested and they have to show some critical thinking, that would be the way forward. But I think it's still we kind of, the mentality I can see in most of the cases really a kind of punishment for using it, and they just have to accept it's not going to go away. And I think it's like, I tell students, have open conversation with them. There are negative things with it, but also there are loads of interesting things you can do. One example, I'm really facing an issue at the moment. One of my personal tutees who really struggles with all the elements of being in class with and using the language and Germanist. And so I was showing, for example, by taking a text that he's struggling with, put on ChatGPT, asking to create questions, and he really started improving the way he's participating in class now, as the teacher says, and has been able to seem to develop and after. So I think there's quite a lot there to consider. Yeah.
And perhaps you're bringing it to this, the question about A level and the fairness, going back to Anne's question. That introduction you can prepare for anyway, can't you? You would get your students to prepare that. So all you're saying is, well, let's face it, some people might prepare it. There's no rule that says you're not allowed to have your au pair or your parent help you.
Yeah.
As you say, Antonio, we're bringing them onto a bit more of a level playing field.
Yeah.
And as long as it's delivered really well, they'll still have to have memorized it or be able to deliver it. And there's enough in, I suppose, in a way, the speaking test for French is the way that you can bring things and make it fairer, rather than there are other subject areas where perhaps that can't happen. We are making them, as you say, Wanda, it's a terrifying thing for both sides. It is pretty obvious when you're listening whether or not things are prepared. Not, you can tell. I went to an off-call weekend once. Oh, that sounds really good, doesn't it? An off-call weekend. It was when I was with
Wild.
I was there with people from university, and I think I was one of 2 teachers at this. And the idea was listening to A level speaking exams it was really to say, is that worth an A, a B, a C, or D, or what do you think? And really, I'm sure you go through this as an examiner, Wanda. We were sitting there, and more or less in the end, we stopped listening to the bits where they were just presenting it, because you thought, well, no, that's not going to give you any idea about interaction or what their grade is going to be. You know, it was good that they prepared it, but it was when you got to the conversation, and then you could work out, you could tell really what sort of standard they were. So that one.
I really echo what Antonio said about the AI giving a bit more parity, because so many people that do languages do have a French granny or a Spanish auntie, or or whatever, and they have that access, and yeah, it just does make it sort of gives everyone that access, and I think that's good. Yeah.
So the next question, David, I've just said, would you like to unmute? Otherwise, I will ask the question on your behalf. Are you there, David Law? Otherwise, I'll ask the question. Okay. So he said, can you, there are 2 questions actually he had, I think. Can you repeat or rephrase questions? Because it's his first time doing this, and that's for AQA.
Yeah. On the card, if you're talking about the questions on the card, you can't rephrase them. You have to ask them exactly as they are. And that's the same with EdXL as well. But any other questions, yes, you can. You can repeat them, but you can't, the questions that are on the card have to be asked in exactly the way that they're written.
Yeah. So I think I wasn't listening. You said about being able to change things from the formal to the informal. So you can change that.
You can do that.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. Because otherwise you end up with like half the exam with VU and half with 2, and or you suddenly start calling your students VU and you've never done that in 7 years, and they're it's another thing to stress them out. So yeah.
There's still another question, but just a comment here I've noticed from V Baxter, who says, we do an IRP on the film study in the mock, which that sounds like, again, that idea of that's what you're doing anyway, you'll have to write about it or talk about it. So and there was another question from Mark Wotton. Are you still here, Mark? Do you want to ask the question? Otherwise I will ask, which was, would you advise using the guidance from EdXL for the 2-minute presentation for AQA, as it's a bit vague in comparison?
Yeah, but you can't, because the AQA are not interested in the sources. It's a completely different task. So if you look at the mark scheme for both, it's the marks are, so with EdXL, the marks are all awarded for your response to written language. They're all AO2, and there's 12 marks for your response to the text or whatever sources. And with AQA, it's only 5 marks, and it has to be a kind of summary of what you're going to talk about, or a sort of introduction to what you're going to talk about. I mean, AQA is a bit vague, I have to say. Even as an examiner, it's a bit vague. But, yeah.
And by the way, David, I've just seen why you didn't want to open your audio. You have 3 kids in the background. I'm sure we would have welcomed them. We're all right with kids. Have I missed any other questions there, or any other? I think, please, could you say, I mean, certainly there's an idea about using AI there. Yen Xiao Fang, would you want to tell us what it is? If you're, otherwise people can read from the chat about how you've used AI, training themselves to ask questions.
Yeah.
ChatGPT. So that's the sort of thing that you were saying, Antonio. Well, if there are lots of positive comments, Wanda, so thank you so much. If there's anything else, just put it in the chat. But otherwise, we look forward to seeing you Tuesday, the 10th of December with Sharon. And it was great to get the number of people who signed up and who have been saying how useful it is, because we did say it really is something we're very aware of, that there aren't many people talking about A-level out there. And equally, if there's anything where people can say, this is what we'd like to talk about, I'll put that perhaps in the feedback, when I send everyone a link to the recording, we could perhaps ask that question and say, what would you like to talk about? Or anybody who'd like to present for us as well. That's something we just thought we'd kick it off. So look, nice comment.
I might have a go at it, at presenting, but it's just that I've been so busy with mocks, and it's been really hectic. So
Yeah.
I can cooperate and we'll present once.
Yeah. And then we've got different people with different backgrounds of languages and boards, because there are quite a few things, aren't there, which do overlap. But
For paper 2, there's more, you know, for the essays, that is a much broader overlap, and even paper 1 actually. Yeah.
the
I have
next,
to go. Have a lovely evening.
okay,
Bye. Thank you.
nice to see you. Lovely. Thank you, Eva. Great session, down to earth and informative.
Oh, thank you.
Eva Lamb. She tell you it wasn't.
Yeah.
So that's lovely. Thank you.
Oh, Ruth
Oh,
is
curriculum review survey. Oh, I'll give you the link to that. In fact, I'll probably do the follow-up to this straight away. Oh, should I stop the recording? I meant to stop that earlier. Okay, I'm about to stop the recording. Oh, so much common sense. Look at that.
nice.
We'll have that on the recording, the nice
Yeah.
comments. Merci. Thank you so much. Curriculum survey review. If you just hang on there, I will give you the link to that now. Oh, there we are. Association for language learning. There we are. You go to ALL, and then you go to consultations. Then it's the first one there. Click here to see our page dedicated to this. So if I click on, let me find Zoom again. So that's the link to the ALL page. And from there, you can go to the various places. And there's, if you're a member, an ALL member, there's another link where we've got a little bit more information as well.
But also about the consultation, it's really, really long, isn't it? But that you don't have to answer everything, do you?
I think that's really something we've got to really stress,
Yeah.
isn't it? If it's
Yeah.
just the A level you want to talk about,
Yeah.
you know, do that. So
Yeah, because it's quite daunting, because I've started it and then I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to need more than 10 minutes to do this. It's going to. Yeah.
aware, it really doesn't have to be written in wonderful prose. I went to a session at the subject. I represented ALL at a council for subject associations.
Yeah.
And there's nothing private or secret about it. But the question was asked, how is this going to be analysed? They've already had 5,000 people reply. So how are they going to do it? And they are going to use AI. And apparently that's what they do. And there's Antonio, he'll understand that. So in fact, that's made a massive difference, because I've been writing mine today. And I thought, actually, it can just be little short sentences. I don't have to make it sound, you know, particularly wordy. And just putting in words, and perhaps putting the same words quite often that you want them to, the point to get across. Who knows?
You make a word cloud and then they'll come out with.
But
Yeah.
the business about the A level, that is certainly a point that I'm making on the curriculum. So I think, you know, whether or not that could make a difference. And I don't know also, I mean, that wasn't what we were talking about today, but whether or not, I know some people have said that the literature has put some people off who otherwise might have done A level. There are some people who love literature, but before, at least it was optional. I seem to remember, I think it was Nick who was saying that, you know, some of his students, the final films, but the book would be something that put you off. So okay.
Yeah.
Well, I must stop the recording. Yeah, stop the recording.